welcome everyone. I would like to introduce Carly Mankus Hernandez from the Associate Dean of International Admissions from Franklin and Marshall College, and Paul Burgees from Tulane University, who are joining us this evening to share a little bit about their institutions, talk about their unique programs, what they offer, why students should consider them. And it's really exciting to have both of them here because I think both of their universities are those that our students are always very interested in. They're always on the lists that we see, and I know that you guys spend a lot of time in India making sure that that's the case. So we didn't want you to miss that opportunity this year. So I'm really glad you could join us. The way we're going to do this is each of them is going to present, and then we're going to open it up to questions. So I also want to just share a little bit about the Red Pen. We are an educational consulting company that is based out of Mumbai. We've been working in Mumbai for 9 years and advising students at all levels. Of course, this is focused on undergraduate applicants, but we do help students for boarding schools, MBA applications, postgrad, and other educational decisions and questions that people have. My partner Namita Mehta is here on the call, and she's supporting me today with helping out with some of the questions and answers. So don't, you do have a Q&A box on your screen. You can just type your question in there at any point in the during the presentations or during the questions that we're going to be asking. And you can, your question will be, we will then collate the questions and present them to the, Carly and Paul, and then we can kind of make sure that everyone's questions get answered. That's our effort within 1 hour. So I guess with that, we'll just go ahead and get started. Carly, do you want to share your screen?
Not sure if I.
Whenever you're ready.
Yep. I'll go ahead and share my presentation first. For Paul and I, this is a bit familiar, even though it is very different, because we travel together in India just about every 6 months.
Okay.
And Tulane and F&M are actually very, very friendly when it comes to visiting several cities a year in India and co-presenting about our two institutions, even though we're very, very unique from each other. We'll each give you about a 3 or 4 minute presentation, I think, just introducing some of the things that set us apart from our peer schools and from each other. At Franklin and Marshall College, we are in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. We're 2,400 students, so we're a small top 50 private liberal arts college, and our city is just about 55,000 people. So it is partially suburban, but a smaller urban environment within driving distance of Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., Baltimore, and New York City. We are set back at least an hour from any one of those cities, though. So one of the reasons I chose to go to F&M when I was seeking undergraduate education was because it was removed from those major metropolitan areas, and I did want to go to a campus that was greener and a little quieter and had access to cities and the internships and the resources that those cities offer, but wasn't in the epicenter of something that felt very highly urban. We have students hailing from 45 different states in the US and 47 different countries any given year. Sometimes it's 50. We are particularly international. I know a lot of our peer schools here have maybe a 12% international population, something that really characterizes F&M and sets us apart and creates our personality on campus is that any given year we are 20 or even 21 or 22% international in our incoming class. Schools that are highly diversified this way do have a lot of campus life built in because we have students around. We're residential, not regional. People are looking for things to do. They want to be involved outside of classes, over weekends, even over breaks. Housing is open 365 days a year. And the infrastructure that's created by having this very, very diverse population hailing from all over the country and all over the world is one of the things that really feeds our student life the most, I think. We also have diversity within our US citizens. 25% of them are domestic students of color, and another 20% of them are Pell eligible, which is a term that means more if you're filling out the US financial aid forms. But that means that there's also socioeconomic diversity, both in the international student and in the domestic students. There's going to be students who come from every different background. And so with our financial aid that I'll talk about in a moment, we're able to facilitate students coming from every background. We do meet 100% of demonstrated need for all of our students for all 4 years. Research is offered in every department. I know that when I was 17, I would have imagined that research is done mostly just in chemistry and biology. But we also offer research for students who are interested in women's and gender studies or public policy or sociology. And the off-campus resources to do that, of course, if you're not going to be in our labs to do what you're interested in studying for a semester for credit towards graduation, you can carry that out with a grant anywhere from outside campus around the country to some students doing so around the world. If it's most applicable, they'll take their research and do a study abroad in the field in finance in Switzerland, for example, or in linguistic studies in interior China. It's up to them. Now, we do offer, of course, research with our professors as well. F&M is undergraduate only. So that means that all of our students on campus are under the age of about 23. And all the opportunities we offer do focus specifically just on those students who are in their first 4 years. That does increase the number of opportunities per opportunity seekers, because they're not having to compete for that lab space, the time and attention of their faculty. We do have teaching assistants on campus. It's a paid student position that you might be interested in for your student job, but teaching assistants don't teach courses, grade papers, or create a syllabus. They really are there just to assist, particularly in the lab settings or in classes that require lots and lots of first source document reading. And so they'll assist, but they're not running their courses. About 60% of our students will study abroad, whether that's in a very traditional setting like a university that they've selected to stay in university housing, or, as I said, they'll carry out their research abroad. We also have guided trips as well. So if you're already someone who has seen a lot around the world and is excited to be in the US, you may still choose to take a short 1 or 2 week trip with a professor to parts of the world that they really specialize in as they chat about some of the history of, for example, Central America is a popular 1 week trip to take during spring break. We do have our most popular majors as business, government, and biology. However, our most popular courses are in music. And so there's a number of students who, even if they are pursuing something very technical, physics, astrophysics, chemistry degree, business, are still going to keep up with theater, dance, and film, and the creative facets of themselves that they've practiced in high school, been in theater productions, don't want to let go of, still take classes, or just do strictly the extracurriculars. And that's something that really diversifies their interests. If you're someone who does have both of those facets to you, that's one of the things that is attractive to a school like F&M in the first place. And so we tend to attract these students at a high rate. We tend to admit them at a high rate. And then, of course, it's easily explained that music is one of the most popular courses on our campus. We are Division III, so athletics are part of our culture, even though they don't dominate it. We have 27 varsity sports, and 1 in 3 of our students is an athlete. We also have a thriving club and intramural scene. So even if you're not in a varsity sport, because of our house system, which I'll talk about in a second, you are likely to be involved outside of your classes on a daily basis. The house system is most easily described by saying Harry Potter. 5 houses with separate colors, crests, governments, and house rules for students to be within a community within a community in their first few years as they acclimate to what it means to be an F&M student. We also have a very extensive office serving the purpose of career services and then some, who seeks to engage all of our students. They have a very high success rate with about 80% of all of our students engaging with them over the course of 4 years as they seek to place them in internships, graduate schools where about 2/3 of our students will go, and then onward to perhaps their first professional position as well. More and more students, as I've been in admission longer, have asked about those outcomes that they're very invested in. More students are concerned now about what is going to be that job market for them upon graduation. We do accept the common application or the coalition application, and we are test optional. So we will evaluate your application with or without testing, and this has been our policy for years. If you're someone who didn't feel like you did very well, we'll evaluate your GPA and the course selection. Out of what was available to you, what rigorous courses did you pick? And so your GPA will carry a little bit more weight if it's the only academic metric that you have, but you will not be penalized for not taking or submitting the SAT. We recommend interviews because we do consider the investment a student has in our community and the interest that they have in being part of it. So they're not required, but we do offer them via Skype for free. We also, of course, will take a taped interview like Initial View if you'd like to send something like that because of the time difference and scheduling being difficult. Early decision is, of course, advantageous if F&M is your first choice. And we do have 2 deadlines, as you can see. You can sign a binding agreement with either one of those. We don't have early action. So if it's your first choice, you can make that binding agreement, but only if F&M really stands out for you. As I said earlier, we meet 100% of institutionally determined need, and we give out about $60 million in aid, which is one of the things that makes F&M affordable, even though liberal arts colleges, small class sizes, small campuses, do tend to have a higher price point. I hope I fit within 5 minutes. I'll just say lastly that Indian students do represent the 2nd largest population of international students at F&M. And this year we have a repeat student body president who is himself an Indian. And so I'm very much missing my regular trips to India right now, but I'll let Paul introduce Tulane to you for a few minutes next.
Perfect. Thank you, Carly. It was nice to hear your voice again, as Carly mentioned. We do get to often travel together, and that is not happening this spring. So it's good to see you in some images of F&M.
Likewise.
So hopefully you can see a familiar landscape here as well. And I'm going to get started by chatting a little bit about Tulane. What I do also really enjoy about traveling with Carly is that we are each alumni of our university. So as Carly graduated from F&M, I attended and graduated from Tulane about 10 or 15 years ago now, and did a couple of different things after graduation. I actually moved to the Arctic. I had a fully funded research grant that Tulane helped me achieve and spent about a year using my 2 majors of economics and anthropology to understand the economic independence and economic sustainability of remote indigenous communities. So it was a fascinating time spent overseas, but a very, very cold time, I will say as well. I'm originally from the Miami area and attended Tulane, where we really never have any snow. So that was a little bit of a shock. Just to paint a picture of you, I guess that is relevant to speak about where we are geographically. New Orleans is on the southern coast of the US, so kind of sandwiched in between Miami and Texas, I guess you could say. And our university is located within the city of New Orleans. We're about 5 kilometers from downtown. We're about a 25-minute Uber ride from the airport. And New Orleans has a lot to offer and is somewhat distinctly different than a lot of other American cities. I'll touch on that in a little bit, but we very much think we have a symbiotic relationship with the city. I think that's a reason many students are drawn to Tulane, is the way that we really do emphasize integrating your curriculum with what the city offers. But to start out with what you can study and what your curriculum might look like, it's smart to talk about academics. At Tulane, we offer about 75 majors. And what's important to note is that when you apply to Tulane and when you're admitted to the university, you don't need to worry about applying to one specific major or one subset of programs. If you're admitted to Tulane, you are admitted to all 75 majors, meaning that, yes, it gives you flexibility to change your mind and switch from one degree to another. But what's more important, and what I think is more unique about Tulane, is really encouraging students to find the intersection in kind of disparate areas of interest. So as I mentioned, I double majored in anthropology and economics. Those are 2 degrees you wouldn't immediately think to really go together, right? But I was passionate about both of those subject areas, And in speaking with my advisors and different faculty members, I found the way that they did intersect, and I was able to make my undergraduate focus and then my graduate focus on this idea of economic sustainability in remote indigenous communities. So really where those two areas of study come together. And I think because students are encouraged to find this niche and that they have this flexibility to do so, not only do students end up extremely passionate about what they're studying, but we have a more collaborative atmosphere rather than competitive. I can assure you that I was the only student who was really, really beating down the door to be able to work with indigenous groups in the Arctic, right? I didn't have to compete with other of my classmates worrying, are you going for that same grant? Or are our papers, our research going to be competitive with each other? Students are more willing and able to collaborate and give their advice when everyone has their own really specific area of study. So that's something I think is really strong. And this is built into a handful of our different majors really as a requirement. So if you are interested in something like computer science, that is an automatic double degree at Tulane, meaning that you'll pick a secondary major to help hone your interests. So maybe you're interested in computer science and applications of applied mathematics. Wonderful. But maybe you're interested in computer science and business, creating new financial forecast models. Or maybe you're interested in computer science and public health. Public health is another well-known degree at Tulane. And this idea of creating mathematic modeling for the spread of disease and viruses, something especially pertinent today. Tulane's focus on the community is also a really big part of what draws students to us. So I guess in our history and on the academic lens, the university first gained international prominence for creating the first vaccine for yellow fever. So this idea of a specialty in public health, in medicine, in tropical medicine and disease, that's been with us for a while. And we encourage students now of all disciplines to be involved and find a way to see how their major practically applies in the world around them and in a way to help others. So pretty much by default, all students are guaranteed an internship with a not-for-profit, a community-based organization, or some startup company within the city. I'll actually finish on these statistics at the end. I'll jump back to that. But in just the last minute or two, I did want to talk about New Orleans and what that relates to in terms of our overall location. So New Orleans, by American standards, is a large city. We have about between 1 and 2 million people. You see the downtown skyline, and it's just about 5 kilometers from there where our university is located. You can see a sort of tram or a streetcar in the bottom right-hand corner that does go right in front of our campus, which is across the street from the city's largest park. So in many ways, you have the benefits of a traditional style American campus, but still being located in a city. And I think a city that is very well known globally for having its own distinct culture, music, heritage, and really emphasizing our own history. That is built into the curriculum again. So you will have field trip based courses where you're able to explore the city and explore the region with your faculty members. 90% of our students come from out of state. So that's something that we definitely know is important to localize our students, whether you're coming from India or just another state in the US. So to talk a little bit about admission, just like Franklin and Marshall, Tulane is now test optional, meaning that we do not require the SAT and ACT for this year's applying class. If you don't send testing, it means we'll just more closely look at your transcript. So the curriculum you've been involved in, the courses that you've taken, and then your overall performance. On average, I would say a Tulane student is scoring in the mid to high 30s on the IB before bonus points. On a US 4.0 scale, students are probably at about a 3.7, a 3.8, if that's relevant to you. On A levels, it's a mix of A stars, A's, and then maybe a B, depending on what the subject ends up being. We can talk about all that later. Tulane does offer need-based aid and merit scholarships. It's about 70% of students who receive some sort of award. And then I will just leave up a couple of these statistics. And I think that is my time.
Okay, great. Thank you. Let me go back to sharing my screen. And thanks. I think that gave everybody a really helpful overview, and hopefully has sort of stimulated the audience into thinking about some questions. Okay, where is I? Okay, video. There I am. Okay, thank you. So now what I want to do is go ahead and we've prepared some questions which we've sort of shared with you, and so they kind of reflect a lot of what we find that our students are particularly concerned about, interested in, etc. So I'm going to go through those, and I'll be asking each of you. So one of the things that that we want to ask you both now in the middle of this whole situation is, how will you be evaluating student applications in the coming year? Will things be different? Will you be giving more weight to some things, less weight to other things? Carly, as you mentioned, F&M has always, not always, but for a very long time been test optional. So that's never really been sort of the core of what you're looking at. I don't think it is for any school, but anyway. What about things like demonstrated interest, interviews? Are those going to become more important? How should students think about that? I'll let you answer first, Carly.
Okay. I think that we're going to see colleges and universities put in a position where we must be highly adaptive and flexible and sensitive to the fact that lots and lots of students had their traditional schedules canceled, whether those were academic or extracurricular. And so everything from the A-level exams to the regular performance of the IBs to theatrical productions has all been put on hold out of necessity. And of course, students won't be penalized for that because it's completely out of their control. Schools, even before that, would have taken a more black and white approach to how they look at final metrics like a GPA or exam outcomes, are going to be put in a position where, like the smaller and liberal arts colleges have been doing for decades, we have to consider different attributes of the student's performance, like last known grades, what schools choose to send, what they're able to send depending on when they closed, and if they continued virtually or if that wasn't an option. All of those things are now going to have to be something that the schools can make equivalent. So we're going to be evaluating students in the multitude of ways that they come to us without penalizing them for their situation. For us, I think that that's less of an enormous transition because we have always looked at students from a million different curriculums and 90 countries around the world in a very holistic way. So their demonstrated interest has always played a role. I think it will now as much as ever, maybe a little bit more than ever. And we're also going to be a school that continues not to recalculate GPAs, to look at students in the context from which they come. So that means as many students ask me in a head-to-head comparison, one-on-one, who's admitted, this student with these AP courses or this student who is class president. It never really is that kind of head-to-head comparison side by side. It's always extremely regional. We'll keep reading from the waitlist and keep considering students in much smaller territories relative to what was available to them to continue to do.
Okay. And do you normally ask students to give interviews? And if so, will you be looking at that in a different way or a new way this year?
We have always recommended interviews, and we've offered free Skypes because we know some of those other services cost a substantial fee for maybe 6 or 7 years. And we Skype interview every single student who requests one anytime between October and about February. And so the students that did opt to do that back then, I think we will really carefully consider those interviews and partially, yes, for demonstrated interest as well.
Okay, that's helpful. Paul, what about you guys? Do you think there's going to be a big transition in the way you're evaluating applications this year?
Yeah, not a huge transition, but definitely partially. What I really want to emphasize to students is that this is a zero-sum equation in the end, right? So if you're not able to take an SAT or an ACT as many times as you like and are then worried about you really having the true score that you're capable of achieving, Well, no one in the world is able to take the SAT as many times as they wanted to. And so realistically, if students are scoring lower on average, we're not only going to accept students with high scores and end up with smaller freshman classes, right? We're still looking at percentiles in a lot of these things. So while it definitely can be frustrating, understand that students all around the world are in the same circumstances, and we really are going to try, or we really are going to work with that and continue to pull students that we think are academically capable as the main piece, and then secondarily see them fitting within the context of our university. So Tulane has not traditionally been test optional for our entire student body. We always were for international students, but now we will be for our entire student body, and we really will focus that much more on the academic piece. Tulane is thought of as a school that emphasizes demonstrated interest more than many others, and so I would say that is where there will be a little bit of a change for us. It's part of why we spend so much time traveling to different cities and high schools. But I think Tulane has offered a kind of inordinate amount of virtual events since we've gone to remote instruction. So on any given week, the admission office hosts somewhere between 8 and 10 different virtual events for students to participate in. And now that's everything from a live cooking demonstration of New Orleans type food to specific webinars focusing on the biomedical engineering program, things like that. So there are still ways to engage, and we will still look for that engagement. We will also be offering interviews as we have before. We tried to have many in person before, but realistically, most will be by Zoom.
Sorry, I was muted. Thank you for answering all my questions, both of you, on this one topic. So I'll move on to the next question. I am getting some interesting questions from the audience, which I think I'm going to go ahead and ask now. And one is a particular student who is admitted to F&M and would like to think about a gap year. How are you handling that this year, Carly? You're muted.
Thank you. Any given year, we do see a number of requests for students who want to defer for a really unique opportunity and take a gap year. This year, of course, we anticipate that we're going to see an uptick in those, but we're prepared to accommodate that. Students wanting a gap year will, like always, need to submit in writing a request for the gap year, and not only that, but also some details about what they will be pursuing. So we'll request the students to have a tentative plan of action about how they'll spend the year, whether that's in some form of academics or service or personal pursuits, and then also to check in twice, typically in November and March, where they email us. They're in touch with me personally and let us know how's it going, how did the plan change. We ask you to even think ahead to identify mentors or instructors that are going to be people that are part of the structure that help you along in your way. We do approve, of course, the gap years that students are going to need for obvious reason related to the global situation right now. But it is a matter of putting that on paper in order to have your deferral or gap year approved, that your place is held for you for the following year.
Okay, great. Paul, do you have anything different to add about what Tulane is planning? Or
very similar. I would say our gap year process is a little more hands-off. We leave it a little bit more to students, how they choose to spend their time, but also open to everyone.
Okay. One thing I'd like you to just say, because I heard you say it on a webinar the other day, and I want you to say it again to my audience, is you mentioned there's a lot of concern right now among admitted Indian students that, you know, I wanted to apply for fall of 2021, but now all those fall of 2020 people who are deferring are taking up all the spots, but a year later. so now how will I ever get into college is the concern. So can you please address that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Carly probably has similar numbers to reference. But while we have seen more questions from students about gap years, realistically, the number of gap year requests, formal requests that we are receiving, is the exact same as it has been in previous years. So we're not necessarily going to see an inordinate amount of students trying to come in and taking up spots, all of that. We still very much have the desire to maintain a full standard number of incoming freshmen each year, and that is definitely true for next year's applying class as well. There are a lot of different metrics that we work with, of course, understanding when Tulane's own students are going to study abroad, the ability of students to secure visas and all of that. But I think you'll find U.S. universities really strive to be one of the most equitable environments in the country, in the United States. And there's not going to be a situation where we're going to have in next year's incoming class half the size because of all these gap years. We'll be able to make it work. Was there another aspect to that you wanted me to highlight?
Well, you mentioned that you normally have a lot of students going on a study abroad year. You also mentioned that study abroad year students will be staying back, and so then just sort of the rotation of students and housing and all of that has to be managed in a way that it will be different. So it'll not be it's not like a one-to-one sort of replacement that happens every year. So.
Exactly. And so that's another way to think about it. If many of our current students or juniors are not going to do their traditional study abroad in Europe and Asia, wherever that might be, well, then the following year, when things are hopefully back more normal, we'll probably have a class of juniors and seniors who are studying abroad at maybe double the rate. So that'll open up more spots.
Okay, great. Thank you. I think I need to move on a little more quickly. All right. So you've both talked a lot about your campuses and campus life and the things that are going on. So can you each say just a little bit about the kind of student that would thrive at your campus, whether that's personality-wise, academic-wise, interest, etc.?
I can answer. First, I think that the kind of student that would thrive at F&M is going to be someone who is interested in finding that niche, that visible role that they're going to have within a community, and maybe being a big fish in a small pond, if you're familiar with that term. It's going to be someone who wants to know and be known by their peers, because in a smaller student body, like 2,400 people, you will be, even if you don't know everyone's name, then particularly by your second and third year, you're going to know many to most of the faces that you walk by every day. And if you're someone who is the keeper for our soccer team or the photographer for our school newspaper, people are going to know that identity about you or where you're from. I think that academically, we do see a lot of students who are pretty detailed, pretty precise, and very ambitious. F&M is known for being a school that attracts students who are very driven academically. So we have certainly a lot of students who come from very, very high-performing percentiles in their high school. But like I said, we also want to see folks who have diversity as well. There is a bell curve of personalities on campus, because anytime you take 2,500 students, you're going to find these different things come out. We do have students who are 80% academic. Their life revolves around academics and the lab, and 20% fun and clubs and sports. There are also students who are from a completely different profile, even academically, that are admitted, because we don't want just that 80-20 type student. On the other end of the spectrum, we might have students who are only 50 or 60% academic in the way that they spend their time and what they value most. And they are often students who are the head of the rugby club. They are students who are running for class president and seeking visibility and leadership in a business internship. So there's not a cookie cutter mold that you must fit into to be admitted, but certainly we're looking for folks who have a diversity of academic and personal interests and are looking for that environment where they're known by their peers.
Thank you. Paul, any sort of, would you like to add something unique about the perfect Tulane student?
Yeah, absolutely. I think beyond meeting the academic component, I describe Tulane students definitely in three ways. I usually say outgoing, adventurous, and kind of willing to take risks. So outgoing fits in that about 90% of Tulane students are from out of state, and the vast majority of students are the only person from their high school to attend Tulane in a given year. So it's a student who is willing to make that leap of faith and wants to go to a university to meet all new people, and knows the university will provide somewhat of a support network, but otherwise is really going to come to campus and immediately start making friends, joining clubs, organizations, all of that. I think our students are so active kind of by necessity because so many of them are coming to campus not knowing anyone else. That's a little bit more of the norm for international students, but it is the same for our domestic students. You're really all in that same situation. I think you also have to be a little bit adventurous to come to a city like New Orleans. It's really where the population marches to the beat of their own drum. It's a really exciting and adventurous place that is a little bit off the beaten path of some other traditional college towns. So I guess those would be the sort of things that I think describe a Tulane student.
Great, thank you. All right, I'm moving on to the next question. So as you all both know, because you travel to India a lot, parents are very anxious about sending their kids so far. And they're concerned about all kinds of things related to safety, and that's understandable. But in the current situation, a lot of them are very nervous about, what if something like this happens again? How has the particular university or college handled this situation? And, how does, can you tell us a little bit about that so that parents can kind of understand the way that you look after students? And I think both of you mentioned it before we started the webinar. So Carly, I know I keep starting with you, but go ahead, because I know exactly what you're going to say. Go ahead.
We, as I mentioned, geographically are in a more suburban environment set pretty well outside the metropolitan areas. And so even a decade ago, when I looked at where I was interested in going to school and I was forming my own college list, that was something to me that felt like a degree of safety in itself. And that is one of the things that I think really helped us out during this latest situation, because to date, and I'm going to knock on my desk because that's what we do for good luck here. To date, we have not had a single case of the COVID-19 virus among our students or faculty or on our campus in any way. And part of the reason for that, I think, is due to very early measures to keep students distanced within the dorm, to send students home if that was possible, to keep them distanced on campus if they chose to stay, which about 400 of them did, to offer meal plans and transportation and assistance, and move to virtual classes very proactively, thinking of course, their best interests, even though it was a huge undertaking. And of course, we've all heard this word a lot in the last few weeks, an unprecedented need for the services of the college. We were able to contain that fairly well. And of course, as I said, I'm knocking on wood for good luck because that's an element to things as well. The various types of safety, as families define safety, has always been something that is at the forefront of your mind if you're sending your son or daughter 8,000 miles around the world to a new institution. And I think we've had a very good record due to our location, due to our size, and due to the proactiveness of the administration on behalf of the students, particularly those international students that can have a higher level of need of service if they are someone who doesn't have a guardian nearby.
Okay. Yeah, you mentioned you have a lot of students on campus still, international students. So Paul, what about Tulane? How did you guys handle the sort of evacuation of students and how
Yeah, I think on a relatively similar timeline.
Okay.
On a relatively similar timeline to F&M, the university decided to move to remote classes and send students home. We had somewhat of experience in this before, I guess, going back about 15 years. This area, this region of the country had a pretty serious hurricane where the university needed to evacuate students for the remainder of a semester. So I guess the playbook was already somewhat written for us, so I think we were pretty quickly able to respond to that, and just understanding that it was in the best interest for students to be closer to home and family if they could. And for those that couldn't, it was in their best interest to stay on campus with many fewer students. So that was the mode that we went to. And I think you saw pretty quickly the university admission office was offering a lot of virtual information sessions and tours and programming. We make sure that there is accommodation for all students. So even if a student lived off campus but couldn't head home and didn't feel comfortable staying there, we were able to bring them back on campus in a sort of socially distant environment with a safe place to stay.
Great, that's good to know. Thank you so much. I think that will sort of help to sort of assuage a lot of fears. So this year, no, actually, I don't think that you did mention. I think both of you mentioned financial aid in the sense that you will meet full demonstrated need, right, Carly?
Yes, so far there hasn't been a change to that policy, and we don't foresee having one.
Okay, and Paul, what about Tulane?
So we have opened up some emergency funds for students who were anticipating difficulty with financing this last semester, and for students going into the fall.
I have a really specific question from someone in our audience who's asking, are transfer students eligible for financial aid?
At Tulane, yes, absolutely. Both merit and need-based aid.
Okay, and Carly?
They're eligible for need-based aid for any student, is also available to transfer students.
And can you, do both of your universities take a significant number of transfer students, or is it very small?
We admit transfer students, freshmen for the spring or the start of a new academic year. And I would say it's probably around 100 students each semester.
Okay, and is it, because someone's asking this question as well, someone who's clearly interested in transferring, I think wants to spend a year doing some kind of a community college program and then transfer after the first year. Is that possible in both of your institutions, or do you want them to wait until transferring after the second year?
A student can absolutely transfer after 1 year of community college. That they don't need to have the full 2-year degree.
Okay. Anything to add? Yeah.
We do have many fewer transfer students. We have a very high retention rate. And so we typically have 20 or so transfer students for a whole year.
Mm-hmm.
And they can transfer in at any point. So we have even had students who did 1 semester at an institution and realized that what they had thought would be a perfect fit for them was not a perfect fit, and wanted to transfer that early, and we've been able to accommodate that.
Okay, great. Thank you. I think that should answer that question. Okay, I think you have both talked about a little bit about, the kind of opportunities that are in the areas of your colleges. I think if you have anything more to add about, how you support international students specifically to find jobs and internships. And one question that's kind of come in that I can piggyback on this, Paul, for you, and I'll let you start then, is does Tulane allow undergraduate freshmen to engage in research in their first year?
Yeah, so just to start talking a little bit about university support for international students, in our Career Services Center, we do kind of have the luxury of having an advisor who is specifically trained to advise international students, understanding that if they're going to use their limited amount of OPT or CPT, they want to be very methodical about that. And so helping to advise students to companies that have a tradition of sponsoring for H-1B visas. That would be one of the more well-known employee visas here in the US. So we can definitely guide students in that way, but then also really leveraging our international alumni network. So it's not just about finding a job in the US. If a student from India is interested in global finance, Well, wonderful. There's no reason you have to have your job or internship in the US or in India. It can be any number of places. And then in regards to research, that's also a big part of the student experience. When I talk about student access to that at, let's say, younger ages, research in its very nature is about specifics and specificity. So if a student comes in with a general idea of wanting to study biology or cell and molecular biology, well, that's wonderful, but you don't just research something on the kind of, let's say, larger level or on the generic level. So when a student, even as a freshman, comes in with a very specific idea about one protein strain that they've been really interested in, and they've read the research of an existing professor, and they start taking a class with that professor in their freshman year, perfect. If you can talk about the specifics you're interested in and you can do it at an earlier age, then yes, you can have access to research in your first year. It just usually takes most students a little longer to figure out what that specific interest is.
Great, thank you. And you did mention this, but I just want to clarify that students can are admitted to, like you said, all the majors, and they can kind of change their major once they're admitted, correct?
Absolutely. So a student,
Yeah, that's for all subjects. There's no sort of restrictions on computer science or very popular majors or things like that. Okay.
no, it's a trial by fire atmosphere. So if you want to come in intending to study sociology and you decide you'd like to change to do engineering physics or computer science, we will absolutely let you change and start taking those classes. Now, whether or not you're able to keep your head above water and really make your way through, that's more on the student.
Okay. Carly, anything that you'd like to add about internships and jobs and how F&M supports students?
I did touch on that a little bit during my presentation. I'll just add that we do have specific mentors as well to see international students through the process, post-graduation or prior, and that 14 of our majors are eligible for the extended OPT in STEM careers.
Okay, that's great to know. Thank you. All right, so you've given a lot of information, and I want each of you is going to give a piece of advice to international applicants this year. Paul?
I'll go ahead and start. Yeah. So for me, I think, as you've heard during this presentation, a lot of things vary from one university to another, whether it's deadlines or scholarship availability or whatever it is. Your absolute best friend in this whole process will be Microsoft Excel. You should familiarize yourself with Microsoft Excel and make a list of a larger initial list of the universities you're interested in, if they offer the majors or programs, what their deadlines are, if they're able to meet your financial need. All of those other pieces, I think, will really help you through the process more than anything else.
Great. I think that's super practical advice that hopefully, I think you're right. It's just a matter of doing the hard work and doing the research and finding the right thing for you. Carly, anything to add in terms of advice?
I would add something that is relevant both to current juniors as well as current seniors. If you're someone who is, of course, been deeply affected by the global situation right now, of course, we can look ahead and say that life is going to be a bit different. We are going to have to be very flexible and adaptive and creative, perhaps again this fall for similar reasons. But there's always going to be a future event or a future problem to solve that is going to require that skill set. And so my best advice, regardless of what year of school or what place in the college search you're in, would be to develop those positive attributes of your mindset and of your approach without letting this event, if it has felt very negative to you, to shape or warp your perspective so greatly that you imagine that life is always going to be just like what it is right now. I know especially if you're a senior, it's very relevant to think about whether you might be taking virtual classes this fall, or to feel very strongly about choosing a college based on what the world feels like right this moment. And I would encourage you to remain open to the reality that change is going to be constant. And this is going to change the way perhaps that we fly and our responsiveness to certain emergencies. But how it feels today is not going to be how the situation feels 6 months from now, or a year from now, or 2 years from now. And so you can be adaptive, but don't let this be the mold that shapes your thinking for the next few years.
That's also really great, very practical advice, because I think it is very easy for young people and their parents to just get very, very sort of caught up in what's happening right now and not focus on the sort of 4-year experience that's awaiting. So I have gotten lots and lots of questions now from our audience, and one of the things I want to do, just because I think it will be fun and we'll get through all these questions quickly, and I'm going to do a little rapid fire round with each of you and ask you these questions. So are you ready, Paul? I'll start with you. They're the same questions, Carly, so you can prepare your answer.
Okay.
Okay. What is the expected or ideal IB score for Tulane?
Before bonus points, it is mid to upper 30s. The higher you are, the more merit scholarship you can qualify for.
Okay, what are the two most popular majors at Tulane?
Psychology and biology.
Okay, is Tulane going to be SAT optional forever?
No, probably not. Definitely for next year, to be announced in the future.
Okay.
But yes, for international students, we will continue to be for the future.
Has Tulane decided whether they're going to start in the fall on campus?
As of now, yes. Plans are being made to welcome students back end of August or early September. There's potential to initially have classes online and come back at a little bit later date, but there is every drive to be on campus in the fall.
Okay, great. Thank you. Good. I got so many questions out of the way. Carly, same questions. What's the ideal IB score for F&M?
Mid-30s, pre-bonus.
Okay. Two most popular majors. I think you mentioned this, but.
Politics or government, and business.
Okay. And you, I assume, will continue with the SAT optional because you always have.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right.
And then are you planning to start on campus in the fall?
As of right now, we are. Of course, we're making flexible plans for how we will accommodate students given the situations that could arise. But right now, we're planning to start orientation August 28th.
Great. Okay. I think that's those were some questions that just kept coming fast and furious. I think that I would like to, because we have, I think, maybe 5 more minutes or so. I wanted to ask some, I'm getting some very specific questions as well, right? Like the one about the admitted student who wants to take a gap year and all of that. So another very specific question that I had for you, Carly, is what are some reasons that you might, if you have a very holistic process, then what are some reasons that a student might not be successful in admissions at F&M? I think this is a student twisting the question of what does it take to get in on its head.
For admission, the process is very holistic in that it weighs almost equally admission based on academics as well as community mindedness. And I know that's a bit of a vague term, so I can explain it very quickly. There are a number of academically qualified students, I think I can say, that apply to both F&M and Tulane that are not necessarily going to be admitted. And that's why we always emphasize that this decision is not personal. It doesn't reflect on your academic abilities. College fit and college selection is always going to have that element of that fit into the community, the interest in the community, and of course the selectivity that means that not everyone who has good grades is necessarily going to be offered a place. for us, community mindedness is going to be something that's deeply entrenched in our house system. So if you are someone who, even if a self-described introvert, is going to be engaged on campus, is going to be someone who is visible, like I was describing before, wants to have that role, even if it's something that's a little bit private, like being a tutor and working one-on-one. Not everyone is going to be expected to stand up at a podium and head a club or be president of a class.
Yeah.
The ability to constantly think of how to be engaged in a way that you choose and feel suits you is that secondary qualification after we look at a student's academic preparedness. And so that is truly selective and very specific to F&M.
Okay, great. That helps. Paul, one question specifically for Tulane that's coming to us is, you mentioned that there are, I think, five schools at Tulane, correct? So can a student double major across schools? Like anthropology and economics are in the same school, so that's why.
Right, but majors like neuroscience and Latin American studies, perfectly welcome.
Okay, so that's allowed. Great. And I think, just trying to see if there's something else. Yeah, there we go. I think those are all the questions that I have. I want to encourage students who or attendees who are on the webinar, and I think there also are quite a few school counselors on the webinar who might want to get in touch with you guys about you know, their particular students and different things they need to advise them. So your email addresses are here, and I encourage, you know, counselors and students to be in touch with you. Another question just came in. Hold on. Does Tulane require 3 years of social sciences with an emphasis on history?
So on Tulane's admission website, there are some published requirements about years of a foreign language and specific subject courses, things like that. Especially for students coming from overseas, we are much more flexible with that and really don't enforce those policies because we know that the streams a student might be a part of really wouldn't allow for that.
Okay, I understand. Sorry, when I read the question, I didn't even understand it, but you did, so good for you. Now I understand the question. I thought it meant that you have to study social science with history at Tulane. I was like, why would you have to do that? Yes, so yeah, those requirements, I suppose, are typically based on a typical US college high school curriculum, right? Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for joining us, both of you. I think this has been tremendously informative for our entire audience and for us, and we really, really appreciate you taking the time this morning, your morning, to you know, to talk to us and to talk to our students. So thank you so much. And I would like to let our audience know that we have another webinar coming up right after this. So I hope to see you all there and learn more about, 2 more great small liberal arts colleges in the US. So it's time to do that research and find the right perfect fit and get your Excel spreadsheet out. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you.
Bye.
Bye.